My husband is off on a lavish vacation while I'm here, preparing to bury our daughter. He sent a text saying, "I'll call you later, important meeting." But he has no idea what I've already uncovered. The day of my daughter Grace's funeral was draped in somber grays. The clouds hung oppressively low, as if the very heavens were mourning her loss. I stood at the edge of her grave, the immense weight of my sorrow pressing down on me, making each breath a struggle. My little girl, my sweet Grace, was gone, and a piece of my own soul had been laid to rest with her. Friends and family murmured condolences, their voices barely reaching me through the fog of my grief. But one thing stood out above all else: the empty space beside me. Marcus wasn't there. As the last shovelful of earth was placed, I felt only numbness. The service was over, but my nightmare was just beginning. As I walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope it was Marcus, finally reaching out to explain his absence from his own daughter's funeral. Instead, it was a text. "Important meeting, I'll call you later." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. The sheer audacity of those words made my blood run cold. But it wasn't just the message itself. It was the small detail beneath it. The location tag. The text hadn't come from a conference room or an office building. It had come from a luxury beach resort. My vision blurred, not with tears this time, but with pure, unadulterated rage. Marcus wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't mourning. He was relaxing in paradise while I stood at our daughter's grave. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tightly as memories flooded back. The weeks leading up to Grace's death, the arguments, the cold distance that had crept into our marriage. He had grown increasingly detached, his excuses piling up like bricks in a wall between us. Business trips, late-night meetings, vague mentions of stress. I had been too consumed with Grace and her illness to question him, but now everything snapped into sharp focus. Marcus's absence wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Even in her final days, when Grace needed him most, he had found reasons not to be there. I remembered the nights I stayed by her bedside, holding her fragile hand as she fought for every breath. I had begged Marcus to come home from one of his supposed trips, to be with her, to be with us. He had promised, but he never showed up. I shook my head, trying to push those memories aside, but they clung to me like a shadow. My grief was still fresh, raw, and bleeding, but something new was stirring within me. Beneath the pain was a spark of anger, growing hotter with every passing second. How dare he abandon us like this? How dare he lie to me, to our family, while our daughter's memory was barely cold? Sitting in the car, I stared at his message again. "I'll call you later." The casual tone, the lack of urgency. It was as if Grace's death was just another inconvenience in his carefully curated life. He didn't care. He didn't care about me, about Grace, or about the family we had built together. And that was when the spark of anger turned into something much darker. As the car rolled away from the cemetery, I clenched my fists and forced myself to focus. My tears had dried, and in their place was a cold determination. If Marcus thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was wrong. If he thought he could betray us and still live his perfect little life, he was delusional. He had taken so much from me already, but I wasn't going to let him take anything else, not without consequences. The drive home felt endless, but it gave me time to think, to plan. I replayed every moment of the past year in my mind, searching for clues, for cracks in Marcus's facade. The late-night phone calls, the sudden expenses, the constant excuses. He had been building this web of lies for months, maybe even years, and I had been too distracted by Grace's illness to see it. But now, with the clarity that only rage can bring, I saw everything. When I arrived home, the emptiness of the house hit me like a punch to the chest. Grace's room was just as she had left it, her toys neatly arranged, her favorite blanket folded at the foot of her bed. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, so I closed the door and leaned against it, tears threatening to fall again. But I couldn't let them, not now. I needed to stay focused. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling as I sipped. I opened my laptop and began searching. Social media profiles, email accounts, bank statements, anything that could confirm what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long to find the proof. Marcus had been withdrawing large sums of money from our joint account, all while claiming to be cutting back on expenses for Grace's medical bills. There were receipts for 5-star hotels, expensive dinners, and spa treatments, all charged to a credit card I didn't even know he had. And then there were the photos. My heart clenched as I scrolled through his social media, finding carefully curated images of him with a younger woman. Lily, that was her name. She was tagged in nearly every photo, her face glowing with happiness as they lounged by the pool or shared cocktails on the beach. In one image, Marcus was kissing her on the cheek, a wide grin on his face. My stomach churned. I slammed the laptop shut, my breathing heavy. It was worse than I had imagined. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was living an entirely separate life, one where Grace and I didn't exist. My grief turned into a burning fury. Marcus had not only betrayed me, but he had also betrayed Grace. He had chosen his own selfish desires over his family, over his daughter, over everything that should have mattered. I stared at my reflection in the window, my face pale and drawn, but my eyes sharp with determination. Marcus thought he had won, that he had escaped the responsibilities of our life together. He thought he could leave me to grieve alone while he basked in the sun with his mistress. But he was wrong. He had underestimated me. As I stood there, a plan began to form in my mind. I didn't just want him to suffer. I wanted to dismantle his entire world piece by piece. I would take everything he cared about just as he had taken everything from me. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. That night, I sat down at the table with a notebook and pen, writing out every detail of my plan. Marcus's lies, his infidelity, his embezzlement. I would expose it all. He thought he was safe, untouchable, but he had no idea what was coming. I cried for my daughter, yes, but now I was going to make Marcus cry for everything he had taken from me. I stared at the notebook in front of me, the plan taking shape with every stroke of my pen. Marcus had built his life on lies, but those lies would be his undoing. Every betrayal, every selfish decision, every dollar stolen from our family. It was all fuel for the fire I was about to ignite. He thought he had escaped unscathed, but his reckoning was coming. The first step was simple. Gather evidence. I couldn't confront him without proof, not just for my own satisfaction, but to ensure there was no way he could wriggle out of the consequences. I opened my laptop again, this time with a clear focus. The financial records I had found earlier were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus had been careful to hide his tracks, but not careful enough. I started with our joint account. Over the past year, there had been multiple withdrawals labeled as business expenses. Each transaction was sizable, often leaving me scrambling to cover Grace's medical bills. I had believed him when he said the money was tied up in investments or that it was being used for her treatments. Now I knew better. Cross-referencing the withdrawals with receipts I found in his emails, I realized most of the money had been spent on luxury hotels, fine dining, and high-end boutiques. It wasn't hard to guess who had been enjoying those luxuries with him. But the money wasn't the only thing he'd stolen. He had taken time, precious moments that Grace and I could never get back. As I scrolled through his emails, I found excuses he had sent to colleagues, canceling meetings to extend his trips. Meanwhile, I had been sitting by Grace's bedside, holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over again. I needed more. Marcus was slippery, and I knew he would try to deny everything unless I had undeniable proof. That was when I decided to bring in someone who could help me dig deeper. A private investigator. I had never done anything like this before, but desperation and determination made me bold. I found a local investigator online, a woman named Eleanor, who had glowing reviews for her discretion and thoroughness. When I called her, I kept my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. I need help uncovering my husband's secrets, I said, my words clipped and direct. Eleanor didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply assured me she would find what I needed and set up a meeting the next morning. I met Eleanor in a quiet cafe. She was sharp-eyed and professional, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. As I laid out what I already knew, his affair, the financial discrepancies, his absence at Grace's funeral, her expression remained neutral, but I could tell she understood the gravity of the situation. I'll dig into his financials, track his movements, and see if there's anything else he's hiding, Eleanor said, jotting notes in a small leather notebook. It might take a few days, but I'll get you what you need. Thank you, I said, my voice soft but resolute. I want to make sure he pays for everything he's done. Over the next few days, Eleanor kept me updated on her progress. Each phone call brought a new revelation, each one more damning than the last. Marcus wasn't just spending our money on vacations and gifts for Lily. He had been embezzling from his own company. According to Eleanor's findings, he had been siphoning funds from his business accounts, covering his tracks with false invoices and fake vendors. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse, and I intended to be the one to push it over. But it wasn't just the financial betrayal that cut deep. Eleanor also uncovered emails between Marcus and Lily discussing their plans to move abroad together. He had been setting the stage to leave me entirely, abandoning the life we had built and starting fresh with her. One email in particular made my blood run cold. In it, Marcus had written, "Once everything is finalized, we'll never have to look back. She'll never see it coming." The audacity, the cruelty. It was almost too much to comprehend. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me. He had plotted to erase me from his life entirely. But if he thought I would sit back and let him win, he was sorely mistaken. With Eleanor's findings in hand, I began the next phase of my plan, building the trap. I needed to make Marcus believe he was in control, that his lies were still working. I couldn't confront him yet, not until the timing was perfect. So I sent him a carefully worded text. "I've been thinking about us. I know we've been distant, but I want to talk. Can we meet at the vacation home next weekend? I think we need some time to reconnect." I stared at the screen waiting for his reply. It didn't take long. "Of course I'll be there," he wrote, his tone casual, as if nothing had happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought he was manipulating me, stringing me along while he pursued his selfish desires. But the truth was, I was the one pulling the strings now. In the days leading up to our meeting, I worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in place. I gathered every piece of evidence Eleanor had uncovered: bank statements, emails, photos, and organized them into a folder. I also contacted an attorney, someone who could advise me on my legal options once I confronted Marcus. But I wasn't just thinking about legal consequences. I wanted Marcus to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. That was why I prepared something extra. A video montage of Grace, her laughter, her smiles, the moments we had shared as a family before everything fell apart. I wanted him to see what he had thrown away. The night before our meeting, I sat alone in the living room, staring at a photo of Grace on the mantel. Her bright eyes and mischievous smile seemed to mock me, reminding me of everything I had lost. But as the tears threatened to spill again, I straightened my back and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice for Grace, for me. Marcus had taken so much from us, but now it was my turn to take something from him. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The drive to the vacation home felt surreal, like walking into the mouth of a storm I had meticulously crafted. The ocean stretched endlessly to my right, its rhythmic waves a stark contrast to the tempest brewing inside me. When I arrived, the house felt different. Too quiet, too perfect. As though it was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I parked the car, stepped out, and inhaled deeply. This place had once been a sanctuary for our family, a retreat filled with Grace's laughter and the warmth of togetherness. Now it felt like a stage for retribution, a battleground where the truth would finally destroy the facade Marcus had built. Inside, I moved with purpose. The folder of evidence Eleanor had compiled was heavy in my hands, not just in weight but in meaning. I opened it on the dining table, spreading out the incriminating documents like pieces of a puzzle. Bank statements, emails, and photos of Marcus with Lily. Each one was a dagger aimed at the heart of his lies. I had also brought something personal, something that would pierce deeper than any financial or legal evidence. It was a video montage of Grace. I connected my laptop to the television and queued it up, pausing on the first frame. Grace beaming at the camera, her eyes full of life. Marcus would see it, and he would feel the depth of what he had lost, not just his daughter but his soul. When everything was in place, I sat down at the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the glass, the enormity of what I was about to do settling over me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about exposing Marcus. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my voice. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. He was here. Marcus entered the house as if he owned the world, his smile practiced and confident. He carried a small overnight bag and wore a casual linen shirt, the epitome of a man on a carefree vacation. "Hey," he said, his voice warm, as though we were still the happy couple we used to be. I forced a smile, masking the storm inside me. "Hey," I replied, my tone steady. "Thanks for coming. I thought we needed some time to talk." He set his bag down and walked over to me, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned my face slightly, letting his kiss land awkwardly near my temple. It was subtle, but he noticed. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by his usual charm. "You're right," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "We've been through a lot. I'm glad you reached out." I nodded, folding my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, keeping my voice calm. "About us, about Grace, about everything that's happened." Marcus nodded solemnly, as though he had any right to share in my grief. "I know it's been hard," he said, his tone dripping with practiced empathy. "But we'll get through this together, I promise." His words were a cruel joke, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for the first piece of evidence. A bank statement showing a series of withdrawals he had labeled as business expenses. I slid it across the table toward him, my movements deliberate. Marcus glanced at the document, his brow furrowing. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just something I found while going through our accounts," I said, tilting my head as though I were genuinely curious. "I noticed some discrepancies. Maybe you can explain them to me?" He picked up the statement, his eyes scanning the numbers. For a brief moment, his confident facade faltered. "These are just work expenses," he said, his voice tight. "You know how it is, travel, meetings, client dinners. It adds up." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "Client dinners at five-star resorts? Meetings that cost thousands of dollars? Marcus, do you really expect me to believe that?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached for another document. A receipt for a luxury suite at a beach resort, dated the same week Grace had been hospitalized. I placed it on the table, the weight of the truth crashing down between us. "Let me guess," I said, my voice icy. "Another client dinner?" Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the door as though he were already plotting his escape. "I don't know what you're trying to imply," he said, his tone defensive. "But you're clearly upset, and I think we should talk about this later." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silence of the house. "Later? Like when you're on your next business trip?" "No, Marcus, we're talking about this now." I stood, pushing my chair back with enough force to make it screech against the floor. Walking to the living room, I grabbed the remote and turned on the television. The screen lit up with Grace's smiling face, frozen in the first frame of the video I had prepared. Marcus froze, his eyes fixed on the screen. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pressed play. The video began to roll, showing clips of Grace laughing, playing, and blowing out candles on her birthday cake. Her voice filled the room, bright and full of joy, a stark contrast to the heavy tension between us. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I turned to Marcus, my voice trembling with rage. "This is what you missed while you were off with her. This is what you threw away for your selfish desires." He didn't respond, he couldn't. The weight of the video, of Grace's absence, was too much for even him to deflect. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the final piece of evidence. A printed email from Lily detailing their plans to move abroad together. I slammed it onto the table in front of him. "Were you even going to say goodbye?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Or were you just going to disappear, leaving me to pick up the pieces while you played house with her?" Marcus's face turned pale, his confidence evaporating like smoke. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "You took everything from me, Marcus. My daughter, my trust, my life. And now you're going to pay for it." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Grace's laughter, still playing on the screen. Marcus looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt, anger, and panic. He had no idea what was coming next. The air between us felt heavy, a suffocating mixture of tension and unspoken truths. Marcus sat frozen, his face ashen as the weight of the evidence I had revealed washed over him. The laughter of our daughter still echoed softly from the television, a cruel reminder of all that he had carelessly abandoned. I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering as I locked eyes with him. "Say something," I demanded, my voice low and sharp. "You always have something to say, Marcus, so explain this to me. Explain how you justified abandoning your daughter while she was dying." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I didn't abandon her," he said finally, his voice trembling. I was working. I was trying to provide for us." "Provide for us?" I shot back, my tone laced with venom. "Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your vacations and your mistress? Is that what you call leaving me alone to watch Grace die while you were too busy lounging on a beach?" His hands clenched into fists on the table, but he didn't meet my eyes. "I didn't know it would get this bad," he muttered. "I didn't know she would die." I finished for him, my voice breaking on the word. "You didn't know because you weren't there, Marcus. You didn't care enough to know." The words hung in the air like a knife between us. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, shaky breath. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't there when I should have been, but you don't understand. I needed an escape. I couldn't handle watching her suffer." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You needed an escape? Do you think I didn't? Do you think I didn't cry myself to sleep every night, praying for a miracle while you were off living your fantasy life? You didn't need an escape, Marcus. You needed an excuse." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I stepped closer, grabbing the folder of evidence and pulling out a photo of him and Lily, smiling arm in arm on a yacht. I held it up in front of him, my hands trembling with anger. "Was she worth it?" I demanded. "Was she worth losing your daughter, your family, your soul?" He flinched as though I had struck him, his eyes flicking to the photo and then away. "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice desperate. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I needed someone who wasn't constantly consumed by grief." The word grief struck me like a physical blow. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Grief," I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief and rage. "You think I wanted to be drowning in grief? You think I chose this? You're the one who left, Marcus. You're the one who abandoned us." He started to reply, but I cut him off, slamming the folder onto the table with a resounding thud. "Save it," I snapped, my voice laced with contempt. "I don't care about your excuses. While you were busy playing house with her, I was busy making sure you'll never get away with what you've done." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear finally breaking through his practiced facade. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice now unsteady. I offered him a cold smile, reaching into my bag and pulling out a thick stack of documents. "These," I said, dropping them heavily onto the table in front of him, "are copies of every fraudulent transaction you made, every dollar you embezzled from your company, every cent you stole from us." His hands visibly trembled as he picked up the documents, his eyes frantically scanning the pages. "How did you get this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Does it matter?" I replied, my tone as icy as a winter wind. "What matters is that the authorities have them too. I reported you, Marcus. They're probably already building a case against you." His face drained of color, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. You can't do that," he stammered, the words barely coherent. "Do you know what will happen to me? I'll lose everything." "You mean like I lost everything?" I shot back, my voice rising with righteous anger. "Like Grace lost everything because you were too selfish to be there for her?" "Yes, Marcus, I know exactly what will happen and I don't care." He stood abruptly, pacing the room restlessly, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "You don't understand," he said, his voice frantic with desperation. "If this gets out, I'll go to prison. My reputation will be ruined." "Good," I said simply, crossing my arms, a grim satisfaction creeping into my voice. "You deserve it." He turned to face me, his expression a twisted mask of anger and desperation. "You're just doing this to hurt me," he accused, his voice laced with bitterness. "You're not thinking about the consequences." I stepped closer, my eyes blazing with fury. The consequences? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You think I'm not thinking about the consequences, Marcus? I have thought about nothing else. Every sleepless night, every tear I've shed, every moment I've spent planning this, I've thought about the consequences. And I'm ready to face them. Are you? He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as he struggled to formulate a response. For the first time he looked truly defeated, the crushing weight of his actions finally collapsing on him like a tidal wave. But I wasn't finished. I turned back to the television, pausing the video of Grace on her birthday. Look at her, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and suppressed rage. Look at what you missed. Look at what you threw away. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the screen. His shoulders slumped, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw tears welling up in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible, a mere whisper of sound. I'm so sorry. I shook my head, my heart heavy with a complex mix of anger and profound grief. It's too late for sorry, Marcus. Sorry doesn't bring Grace back. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the television screen. Marcus sank heavily into a chair, burying his face in his hands, while I stood over him, my arms crossed, a silent sentinel of his impending doom. You thought you could betray me, betray us, and walk away unscathed? I said, my voice steady and resolute. But now you know the truth. You can't and you won't. As the full weight of my words settled over him, I felt a strange sense of relief begin to wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself, a piece of my own strength. Marcus had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take this. He couldn't take my power, my voice, my determination. I turned off the television, plunging the room into a heavy silence. We're done here, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. You can leave. But don't think for a second that this is over. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, fear, and something else. Something I couldn't quite decipher. But I didn't care. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, and I was just getting started. Marcus didn't leave immediately. He remained slumped in the chair, staring blankly at the folder of evidence as if willing it to vanish into thin air. His once confident demeanor had completely dissolved, leaving behind only a pitiful display of defeat and denial. I stood by the window, my arms crossed, watching the relentless waves crash against the shore in the distance. For so long, Marcus had controlled the narrative of our lives. Now that control was firmly mine. You should go, I said, breaking the heavy silence. My voice was cold and unyielding, leaving no room for argument. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and filled with a desperate plea. Please, let's talk about this, he pleaded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and regret. We can fix this, fix us. I turned to face him, my expression unwavering, completely devoid of any lingering emotion. There's no us, Marcus. There hasn't been for a long time. And now there's no fixing this either. He stood up, gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping him upright, his knuckles white with strain. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Ruin me? Destroy my life? I tilted my head, a humorless smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I'm not ruining your life, Marcus. You did that all on your own. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it. He opened his mouth to respond, to perhaps beg or plead, but I held up a hand to silence him, cutting him off before he could utter a single word. Don't, I said, my voice firm and resolute. Just leave. With that, I turned away, my resolve unwavering. I didn't watch as he gathered his few remaining things and left the room. The sound of the door closing softly behind him was enough. I stood in the quiet aftermath, letting the pent-up tension slowly seep out of my body. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The next morning I got straight to work. Marcus had underestimated me for years, treating me as a passive participant in our marriage, someone too blinded by love or duty to challenge him. But he had no idea what I was truly capable of when pushed to my absolute limits. The first step was ensuring his complete professional downfall. I drafted an anonymous email to the board of directors at his company, meticulously attaching copies of the damning financial documents Eleanor had uncovered. The email was concise and devastatingly effective, detailing his embezzlement and other fraudulent activities with ruthless precision. I didn't just send it to the board. I also sent it to key stakeholders, major investors, and even the company's legal team. There would be absolutely no way for Marcus to wiggle out of this one. As I hit send, a wave of profound satisfaction washed over me. Marcus had built his entire career on a foundation of lies and deceit, and now those very lies would unravel in a spectacular and utterly public fashion. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the end of the day, news of Marcus's financial misconduct had spread like wildfire within his company. Eleanor, ever thorough and resourceful, kept me updated on the escalating chaos unfolding behind closed doors. "They're conducting an internal investigation," she told me over the phone, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and grim satisfaction. "It's only a matter of time before they bring in law enforcement." "Good," I replied, my tone steady and unwavering. "Let them." Meanwhile, I made absolutely sure Marcus's personal life wasn't spared from scrutiny either. I discreetly shared the photos of him and Lily with a carefully curated list of mutual acquaintances, close friends, family members, and influential colleagues. The reactions were immediate and intensely visceral. Messages flooded my phone, most of them expressing shock, disbelief, and outright outrage. People who had once admired and respected Marcus now saw him for what he truly was. A selfish, deceitful man who had betrayed not only his wife but also his own daughter's memory. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring he could never hurt anyone the way he had hurt me. 2 days later, I received the call I had been waiting for. A stern, authoritative voice on the other end of the line introduced himself as Detective Reynolds, part of the task force investigating financial crimes in our city. He explained that they had received credible evidence of Marcus's embezzlement and were moving forward with an official investigation. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said, his voice professional and appreciative. "We'll be in touch if we need any further information." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with an overwhelming sense of vindication. For months I had felt powerless, trapped in a suffocating web of grief and betrayal. Now I was the one holding all the threads, and Marcus was the one caught firmly in the trap. The day Marcus was arrested was both surreal and strangely satisfying. I watched from the window of my apartment as 2 plainclothes officers approached him outside his office building. He tried to maintain his composure, but the sight of him being handcuffed and led away into a police squad car was a moment I would never forget. It was etched into my memory forever. My phone buzzed incessantly after the news broke, the notifications a constant reminder of the unfolding drama. Friends and acquaintances shared articles and social media posts, their messages a mix of disbelief, morbid fascination, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. Marcus's name was plastered across countless headlines. Prominent executive arrested for embezzlement. Businessman's double life exposed in shocking scandal. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I sat quietly in my living room, sipping a cup of tea and calmly scrolling through the media coverage. The photos accompanying the articles were particularly unflattering, capturing Marcus being led away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and despair. It was poetic justice served cold and swift. A week later, Marcus called me from jail. I stared at the phone as it rang, his name flashing on the screen like a warning sign. For a fleeting moment, I considered answering, just to hear the desperation in his voice, to savor his downfall. But then I remembered Grace's infectious laughter, the countless nights I had spent alone in the sterile hospital room, the cold, crushing emptiness of her funeral. I let the call go to voicemail. He called again the next day, and the day after that, each time I deliberately ignored him. I didn't need to hear his pathetic excuses or his desperate pleas for forgiveness. I had given him enough chances, enough forgiveness long ago. Now, it was his turn to face the inevitable consequences of his actions. The media storm continued to rage relentlessly, and I watched it all unfold from the relative safety and solitude of my home. Reporters camped outside Marcus's former office, eager for statements from his stunned and bewildered colleagues. Tabloids speculated wildly about his relationship with Lily, painting her as a gold-digging accomplice, a heartless opportunist who had preyed on his vulnerability. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control slowly returning to my life. Marcus had tried to take everything from me, to strip me bare of my dignity and my hope, but he had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering determination. I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to thrive. As the weeks passed, I slowly began to rebuild my shattered life, piece by painstaking piece. I sold the vacation home, the place that had once been a symbol of our happy family, but had become tainted by Marcus's betrayal, a constant reminder of our broken promises and shattered dreams. I donated all of the proceeds to a reputable charity supporting children with terminal illnesses, a poignant tribute to Grace's memory, and a way to honor her legacy of kindness and compassion. Every decision I made, every small step I took, was a conscious reminder that I was so much more than just the pain Marcus had caused me. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had finally reclaimed her power and her voice. And Marcus, he was just a man who had lost everything. A cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of one's own choices. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the suffocating stillness that had haunted me relentlessly after Grace's tragic death, nor was it the heavy, oppressive quiet that Marcus's betrayal had left behind, a constant reminder of his infidelity and deceit. This silence was lighter, almost peaceful, as though the house itself was finally able to breathe again, free from the weight of sorrow and the lingering presence of betrayal. Marcus was gone, his life in ruins, and I had made absolutely sure he could no longer manipulate or hurt anyone else. The headlines about his trial had begun to fade from the public consciousness, quickly replaced by fresher scandals and fleeting news cycles. But for me, the echoes of his dramatic downfall remained, lingering like the lingering scent of rain after a violent storm, a constant reminder of the justice I had sought and the price he had ultimately paid. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace, the dancing light casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The warmth should have been comforting, a soothing balm against the chill of the evening, but a strange hollowness lingered in my chest, a nagging emptiness that refused to be filled. I had done what I needed to do, what I knew in my heart was absolutely right. Marcus deserved every consequence, every ounce of the public humiliation and legal retribution he faced. And yet, I couldn't completely ignore the faint ache that whispered in the back of my mind, a persistent voice that refused to be silenced. It wasn't regret. No, I didn't regret exposing him, dismantling the elaborate empire of lies he had so meticulously built on the fragile foundation of our broken family. It was something else entirely, a quiet realization that revenge, as necessary as it may have been, simply couldn't mend everything. It couldn't bring Grace back, nor could it erase the deep scars Marcus had indelibly etched onto my heart. Justice had been served, but justice, I was beginning to understand, wasn't the same thing as healing. I let out a deep breath, running my fingers slowly along the smooth edge of the coffee table. A framed photo of Grace sat there, her smile as radiant and captivating as ever, her eyes sparkling with joy and mischief. I picked it up gently, tracing the delicate curve of her cheek with my thumb, as if I could somehow reach through time and touch her one last time. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. And in that poignant moment I made a firm decision. It was time to truly move forward, not just for myself but for Grace. She had been my guiding light, my unwavering reason for fighting through every storm that life had thrown our way. I couldn't allow her precious memory to be forever tied to the pain Marcus had inflicted upon us. I needed to create something beautiful from the ashes of our past, to transform our shared tragedy into a legacy of hope and healing. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity and profound change, a period of intense reflection and determined action. I started by packing up the old family home, carefully boxing up the memories that carried both immense joy and unspeakable sorrow. It wasn't an easy process. Every room held fragments of a life that no longer existed, echoes of laughter that had once filled the air, the faint lingering scent of Grace's favorite lavender shampoo in the bathroom, the tiny handprints she had playfully left on the windows. But as painful as it was, it also felt strangely liberating. With each box I sealed shut, I felt myself taking a deliberate step closer to reclaiming my life, to shedding the heavy weight of a house that had gradually become more of a prison than a sanctuary. I reached out to a local realtor, making the difficult decision to list the house for sale. When the for sale sign went up on the front lawn, I felt a strange mix of emotions wash over me. Profound sadness for what I was leaving behind, a deep sense of loss for the life we had once shared within those walls, but also a burgeoning hope for what lay ahead, a cautious optimism for a future free from the ghosts of the past. Moving to a smaller, quieter apartment brought its own unique set of challenges, but it also offered a fresh start, a clean slate upon which I could begin to write a new chapter in my life. The space was modest but warm and inviting, with sunlight streaming brightly through the windows and a cozy nook nestled by the bay window where I could sit with a cup of tea and lose myself in the pages of a good book. It felt like mine, finally and completely free from Marcus's long shadow, free from the haunting ghosts of our shared past. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in months, even years. Grief and betrayal had isolated me, creating a deep chasm between me and the outside world. But now I found unexpected solace in their familiar company. We shared dinners, laughter, and stories that reminded me of the vibrant world beyond my own personal pain, a world that was still waiting to be explored. Slowly, I began to rediscover the long-dormant pieces of myself that had been buried under the overwhelming weight of loss and sorrow. I also threw myself headfirst into new pursuits, activities I had always wanted to try but never had the time or the courage to pursue. I enrolled in a photography class, learning how to capture the fleeting beauty of everyday moments, how to freeze time in a single frame. I volunteered at a local children's hospital, spending hours reading stories to the young patients and watching their faces light up with wonder and delight. These small victories felt like the first tentative steps toward healing, like planting delicate seeds in a garden that had long been barren and neglected. One quiet afternoon, as I sat by the bay window with Grace's cherished photo in my hands, a powerful idea began to take shape in my mind. I wanted to honor her memory in a way that would bring light and hope to others, just as she had brought so much light and joy to my life. That's when the Grace Foundation was born. I started small, reaching out to trusted community leaders and established organizations for support and guidance. The foundation's mission was simple yet profound: to provide resources and unwavering support for families with children facing terminal illnesses, to ease their burdens and offer them a glimmer of hope in their darkest hours. It was a cause that was deeply personal to me, one that allowed me to channel my own grief and heartache into something truly meaningful and impactful. The first event we organized was a charity walk, and I was utterly overwhelmed by the outpouring of support we received. Friends, neighbors, and even complete strangers came together, their footsteps echoing a shared sense of purpose and compassion. As I stood at the starting line, looking out at the vast sea of faces, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. Grace's memory was alive in every step they took, in every dollar they raised to help families in need. The foundation gave me a renewed sense of purpose, a driving force I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me that love could endure, even in the face of unimaginable loss, and that even in the deepest darkness, there was always a flicker of hope to be found. Grace's spirit lived on, not just in my heart, but in the countless lives of the families we touched. Despite the remarkable progress I had made, there were still moments when the past would inevitably creep up on me, uninvited and unwelcome. Late at night, when the world was still and silent and the shadows grew long and distorted, I would find myself thinking about Marcus, not with longing or regret, but with a lingering sense of curiosity and a faint tremor of unease. Did he feel any genuine remorse for what he had done? Did he ever think about Grace, about the life he had so carelessly thrown away in his pursuit of selfish desires? I knew I would probably never know the answers to these questions, and perhaps that was for the best. Marcus's chapter in my life was finally closed, sealed shut by the devastating choices he had made. My story was mine to write now, and I was determined not to let his mistakes and his transgressions define it. One evening, as I sat on the couch, mindlessly flipping through the pages of an old photo album, I came across a picture of Grace and me at the beach, a snapshot from a happier time. She was meticulously building a sandcastle, her brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth. I knelt beside her, laughing at her earnestness, my arm wrapped protectively around her small shoulders. I smiled, a bittersweet ache blooming in my chest. The memories no longer felt like daggers, piercing my heart with unbearable pain. Instead, they felt like precious gifts, gentle reminders of the unconditional love we had shared. A love that transcended time and loss. I miss you every single day. I whispered, my voice soft and filled with emotion. But I'm going to be okay, I promise. And for the first time in a very long time, I actually believed it. The days turned into weeks, the weeks gradually morphed into months, and slowly but surely life began to take on a new rhythm, a more gentle and harmonious cadence. The pain didn't completely disappear. I knew it never truly would. But it became a part of me, a quiet reminder of where I had been and how far I had ultimately come. The Grace Foundation continued to grow and thrive, touching more lives than I ever could have imagined in my wildest dreams. Every success, every family we helped, felt like a small but significant victory for Grace's legacy, a testament to the enduring power of her spirit. As I stood on the stage at our second annual fundraiser, looking out at the crowd of supportive faces, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me, a feeling of contentment and gratitude that I hadn't experienced in years. Marcus's name was now a distant memory, his presence completely erased from the life I had so painstakingly rebuilt. This was my story now, a story of resilience, of unwavering love, of finding light and hope in the very darkest of places. And as I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady and strong, I knew with unwavering certainty that Grace was with me, her radiant light guiding me forward every step of the way. The envelope sat innocuously on my kitchen table, an unassuming piece of paper that carried the unexpected weight of everything I thought I had successfully left behind. My name was scrawled across the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting, shaky and uneven, but undeniably his. It had arrived earlier that day, forwarded from my old address. For hours I had deliberately ignored it, leaving it unopened while I went about my daily routine, pretending it didn't exist. But now, as the house settled into its nightly stillness and the shadows danced across the walls, I found myself staring at it, unable to look away, drawn to it by an invisible force. I didn't want to read it. Whatever Marcus had to say, it couldn't possibly undo the immense pain he'd caused or justify the devastating choices he'd made. But something about the letter felt different, heavier, more significant. It wasn't just another self-serving attempt to justify his reprehensible behavior. I could sense that even before breaking the seal. Finally, with trembling fingers, I picked it up and tore it open. The paper inside was creased and worn, the words written in a hurried, uneven hand, as if he had been compelled to write it in a moment of intense urgency. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever it contained, and began to read. Dear my name. I don't know if you'll even read this. Part of me hopes you don't, because I don't deserve to have my words heard by you. Not after everything I've done. But if you are reading this, I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry for everything. I've spent every single day in here thinking about Grace, about you, about what I did to both of you. There are no excuses for my actions. No words that can ever erase the immense pain I caused. I know that now more clearly than ever before. But there's something I've been carrying with me for so long. Something I desperately need to tell you. Even if it doesn't change a single thing. The night Grace died, I was on a plane. You probably remember it as one of my so-called business trips. But what you don't know is that I wasn't just running away from my responsibilities. I was running from the truth. Before I left, I had a conversation with her doctor. He told me that Grace's condition was worsening rapidly, and that her chances of survival were tragically slim. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, of watching her suffer, of failing her as a father. So I ran. I boarded that plane and left you to face it all alone. A decision that haunts me to this day. But there's something else, something even more difficult to admit. I found out weeks later, after it was far too late, that there had been an experimental treatment available. It wasn't a guarantee by any means, but it could have been a chance, however small. I didn't tell you about it then because I didn't want you to have false hope, to raise your expectations only to have them cruelly dashed. But now I realize the truth. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of hope, afraid of losing her even after trying absolutely everything, afraid of the overwhelming pain of facing the inevitable. I failed Grace, I failed you, and I will live with that crushing weight for the rest of my life. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I needed to tell you this. I needed you to know the complete truth, however painful it may be. Yours, Marcus. The letter slipped from my trembling hands and fluttered silently to the table, the words swimming before my eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible mess. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. My chest felt unbearably tight, my heart pounding erratically in my ears. The words on the page seemed to shimmer and distort as tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them, streaming down my cheeks in hot, silent rivers. An experimental treatment, a chance however slim that Grace could have survived, and Marcus had deliberately kept it from me. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me suspended in a horrifying void. My grief for Grace, which I thought I had finally learned to live with, surged back with a renewed vengeance, raw and agonizingly fresh. All this time I had believed that I had done everything humanly possible for her, that I had fought with every ounce of strength and determination I possessed. But now I wasn't so sure. Had I failed Grace? Could I have done more? If I'd only known about the treatment. The questions swirled in my mind, tormenting me with endless possibilities and agonizing what-ifs. And what about Marcus? Did his belated confession change anything about the man he had become? Did his guilt, however genuine, somehow absolve him of his past transgressions? I desperately wanted to hate him, to dismiss his words as nothing more than a desperate attempt at self-exoneration. I wanted to throw the letter into the roaring fire and watch it burn along with every last memory of him, to obliterate him from my thoughts forever. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't. His words, his confession of guilt, they felt undeniably real. For the first time, I saw Marcus not as the one-dimensional villain I had so meticulously painted him to be, but as a deeply flawed, profoundly broken man who had made a series of terrible choices out of a complex mix of fear, weakness, and self-preservation. That realization didn't excuse his actions. It didn't erase the immense pain he had caused, or somehow magically restore the lives he had so carelessly destroyed. But it made him human, and that made my feelings all the more complicated, all the more difficult to process. For hours I sat in stunned silence, the letter a constant, accusing presence on the table in front of me. My emotions were a tangled mess, a chaotic jumble of rage, sorrow, guilt, and even surprisingly a flicker of pity. Marcus's long-overdue confession had reopened wounds I thought had long since healed, forcing me to confront a whole new set of agonizing questions I didn't want to ask, questions that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about myself and the choices I had made. Had I truly done everything I could for Grace? Could I have pushed harder, demanded more information, refused to accept the doctor's initial prognosis? And what about Marcus? Did his heartfelt admission change anything about the man he had become, or was it simply a final act of selfishness, a desperate attempt to alleviate his own guilt at my expense? I wanted to hate him, to condemn him for his weakness and his cowardice. I wanted to tear the letter to shreds and banish him from my thoughts forever. But as much as I wanted to, I simply couldn't. His words, his raw and unfiltered expression of guilt, felt undeniably genuine, resonating with a painful truth that I could no longer deny. For the first time I saw Marcus not as the cartoonish villain I had created in my mind, but as a deeply damaged and fundamentally broken man. A man who had made a series of devastatingly wrong choices out of a toxic combination of fear, selfishness, and a profound inability to cope with the harsh realities of life. That realization didn't excuse his past behavior. It didn't magically erase the years of pain and suffering he had inflicted upon me and Grace. But it did make him human, and that made my feelings all the more complex, all the more difficult to reconcile. The next morning I went for a walk, hoping the crisp air and birdsong would clear my head. The letter's contents still weighed heavily on my mind, each word echoing with every step. By the time I returned home I'd made a decision. I wouldn't respond. There was nothing I could say to bring Grace back or undo the past. However, I couldn't simply ignore the letter either. I needed to confront it, to face the truths it held, even if it meant reopening old wounds. That evening, I sat down with my journal, the one I'd started after Grace's passing but abandoned amidst Marcus's downfall. I poured out every feeling, every thought, every memory the letter had unearthed. I wrote about Grace, her laughter, her strength, the love that had filled our lives even in the darkest times. And I wrote about Marcus, his betrayal, his weakness, the pain he had caused. But I also wrote about his confession, the weight of his guilt, and the humanity it revealed. When I finished, the pages were filled with raw, unfiltered emotions. I closed the journal feeling a strange sense of release. For the first time, I wasn't holding everything inside. I was letting it out, letting it go. In the weeks that followed, I continued to reflect on the letter and its implications for my path forward. I didn't forgive Marcus entirely, but I refused to let his actions define me. His choices were his burden, not mine. Instead, I focused on Grace, on the light she had brought into my life, and the love that would never fade. I channeled my energy into the Grace Foundation, ensuring that other families would have the resources and support they needed to fight for their children. Slowly, I began to heal, not just from Marcus's betrayal, but from the lingering guilt and grief that had weighed me down for so long. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. One evening, as I sat by the bay window with a cup of tea, I watched the setting sun and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Grace's photo sat on the table beside me, her smile a constant reminder of the love that had sustained me through the storm. "I hope you're proud of me," I whispered, my voice soft. For the first time, I truly believed she was. The decision to visit Marcus wasn't easy. For weeks after reading his letter, I wrestled with whether a face-to-face meeting was even necessary. Part of me felt I had already moved on, that confronting him might only stir up pain I had worked so hard to bury. But another part of me, the part that carried Grace's laughter and Marcus's betrayal in equal measure, needed to hear his explanation. Not for him, but for me. Closure wasn't something that would come neatly packaged, I knew that. But this visit felt like the final thread I needed to cut before I could truly leave the past behind. The drive to the prison was long and silent, the hum of the engine the only sound accompanying my thoughts. The landscape blurred by in shades of gray, the winter sky heavy with clouds. By the time I reached the facility, my nerves felt like a tightly coiled spring. I parked the car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I gathered my composure. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and cold. The sharp clang of metal doors and the echo of footsteps down the tiled hallways were unnerving, a stark reminder of where Marcus had ended up. The guard led me to a small visitation room with a table and 2 chairs separated by a thick pane of glass. A phone hung on either side of the barrier, our only means of communication. I sat down and waited. Minutes later, Marcus was led in, flanked by 2 guards. His appearance startled me. The man I had once known as confident, polished, and self-assured now looked frail and hollow. His face was gaunt, his hair streaked with gray, and his eyes carried a weariness I had never seen before. He shuffled to his seat, his cuffs clinking softly as he sat. For a moment, we simply stared at each other through the glass. I picked up the phone first, the cold plastic pressing against my ear. Marcus hesitated, then lifted his own receiver. "You look good," he said awkwardly, his voice raspier than I remembered. I didn't return the sentiment. "Why did you write to me?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. I needed to," he stammered. "I've been carrying that secret for so long, and I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. You deserve to know the truth." "The truth?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You mean the truth about how you ran away from Grace when she needed you most? Or the truth about how you kept the possibility of treatment from me because you were too afraid?" Marcus winced, the words hitting him like physical blows. "I know I failed her," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed both of you. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret it." "Regret doesn't change anything," I shot back, my anger simmering just below the surface. "It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't undo the choices you made. So why now? Why confess after all this time?" His hands tightened around the receiver, his knuckles white. "Because I can't carry it anymore," he admitted. "Every night I see her in my dreams, her smile, her laugh, and then the look on your face when you realized I wasn't there. It haunts me." Narrator's name. "It's my punishment and I deserve it." I studied him through the glass, searching for any sign of manipulation, any trace of the man who had once lied so easily. But all I saw was a broken shell, someone crushed under the weight of his own guilt. And for the first time I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt nothing. "I came here because I needed to hear it from you," I said finally. "I needed to know if you truly understood the damage you caused, and now I do." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of hope and despair. Does that mean you forgive me? The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I thought about Grace, about the love she had brought into our lives, and about the pain Marcus had inflicted. Forgiveness was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said honestly, but I can let go. I can move forward, and that's enough for me. His shoulders slumped, as though the words had both relieved and defeated him. I understand, he said quietly, and I'm sorry for everything. I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Goodbye, Marcus. I placed the receiver back on its cradle. Marcus watched me through the glass, his expression unreadable, as I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. The drive home felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The gray sky seemed brighter, the road ahead clearer. Marcus's confession hadn't changed the past, but it had given me the clarity I needed to move beyond it. That evening I sat by the bay window with my journal in my lap, writing down everything I had experienced at the prison. The anger, the sadness, the strange sense of closure. It all spilled onto the page, raw and unfiltered. When I finished, I closed the journal and placed it on the table beside Grace's photo. I did it, I whispered, looking at her smiling face. I finally let him go. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater, but in that silence I felt Grace's presence, her warmth filling the space around me. And for the first time in years I felt truly free. The next morning I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The memories of Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were still there, but they no longer consumed me. They were a part of my story, yes, but they didn't define it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. The world felt new, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to dream of before. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days following my visit to Marcus felt like stepping into a new world, one where the ghosts of the past no longer had the power to hold me back. For years my life had been defined by grief, betrayal, and the weight of unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, I felt truly unburdened. The confrontation had been my final act of closure, and as I walked away from that prison, I knew I had left more than just Marcus behind. I had left behind the guilt, the anger, and the what-ifs that had haunted me for so long. Back at home, I decided it was time to create a physical representation of my emotional shift. I spent a weekend organizing every corner of my apartment, sorting through boxes that had remained unopened since my move. It was a therapeutic process, one that allowed me to confront the pieces of my past I had been avoiding. I started with Grace's belongings, her toys, her clothes, her books. Each item was a bittersweet reminder of the joy she had brought into my life. I took my time, holding each piece and letting the memories wash over me. There was no rush, no need to push through the emotions. When I was ready, I carefully packed some of her things to donate, knowing they could bring comfort to another child. Other items, like her favorite bunny and the drawing she had made for me, I kept, placing them in a memory box I could revisit whenever I needed to feel close to her. As I worked, I felt a sense of lightness begin to settle over me. My apartment no longer felt like a temporary refuge, but a true home, a space where I could nurture new beginnings while honoring the past. With my physical space in order, I turned my attention to the future. The Grace Foundation had grown steadily over the past year, and I knew it was time to take the next step. Inspired by the letters and emails I had received from families we had helped, I began planning a new initiative, a mentorship program for parents navigating the challenges of caring for children with terminal illnesses. The idea filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I reached out to volunteers, healthcare professionals, and community leaders, building a network of support that would allow the program to thrive. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, each small success a reminder of why I had started the foundation in the first place. Grace's memory wasn't just alive. It was making a difference in the lives of so many. Outside of my work with the foundation, I began exploring other passions I had put on hold for too long. Photography, which had once been a hobby, became a source of creative fulfillment. I started taking my camera on long walks, capturing the beauty of everyday moments, the golden light of sunset filtering through trees, the laughter of children playing in the park, the intricate details of a flower in bloom. Each photo felt like a celebration of life, a way of seeing the world through Grace's eyes. One of my favorite projects was creating a photo journal dedicated to her memory. I filled it with images that reminded me of her. Soft pastel skies, butterflies dancing among wildflowers, and the sparkle of sunlight on water. It was a quiet, personal tribute, one that brought me comfort and joy. As I opened myself to new experiences, I found that people began to re-enter my life in unexpected ways. Old friends who had drifted away during my darkest days reached out, their presence a reminder of the connections I had once cherished. New friendships blossomed as well, born from shared interests and a mutual desire to build something meaningful. One evening, I attended a community art event hosted by a local gallery. It was a small gathering, intimate and welcoming, with people mingling over wine and discussing the pieces on display. I brought a few of my own photographs to share, unsure of how they would be received. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers approached me with kind words and genuine interest, their encouragement sparking a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Among the attendees was a woman named Clara, an artist who specialized in mixed media. We struck up a conversation that quickly turned into a friendship, bonded by our shared love of creativity and a mutual understanding of loss. Clara had lost her partner to cancer several years earlier, and her art reflected her journey of healing. Through her, I found not only inspiration but also a kindred spirit, someone who understood the complexities of grief and the resilience it took to rebuild. As the months passed, I began to rediscover the simple joys of life. I allowed myself to laugh again, to savor moments of happiness without the guilt that had once overshadowed them. Whether it was sharing a meal with friends, dancing in the kitchen to Grace's favorite songs, or watching a sunrise with a cup of tea in hand, I embraced each moment as a gift. One particularly beautiful day, I took a drive to the beach, a place that had always held a special significance for Grace and me. Standing at the edge of the water, the waves lapping gently at my feet, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The sky stretched endlessly above me, the horizon a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. I closed my eyes and imagined Grace beside me, her laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. "Thank you," I whispered, the words carried away by the breeze, "for everything." In time, I began to imagine a future filled with possibility. The wounds of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined who I was. I was stronger now, more resilient, and deeply grateful for the love that had carried me through even the darkest moments. Grace's memory was no longer a source of sorrow, but a wellspring of strength. Her light lived on in the work I did, the connections I nurtured, and the joy I allowed myself to feel. She had taught me the power of love, and that love would guide me as I continued to move forward. As I sat at my desk one evening drafting plans for the Foundation's next event, I glanced at the photo of Grace that hung on the wall above me. Her smile was as radiant as ever, a constant reminder of the love that had shaped my life. "I think we're doing pretty well, don't you?" I said aloud, smiling softly. The room was quiet, but in that stillness I felt her presence, warm and comforting. It was as though she was saying, "Yes, Mom, you're doing great." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The story of my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. The pages ahead were blank, waiting to be filled with moments of love, joy, and purpose. And as I picked up my pen to write the next chapter, I felt ready to embrace whatever the future held. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The idea to expand the Grace Foundation had been brewing in my mind for months, but it wasn't until that quiet evening by the bay window, Grace's photo smiling down at me, that I truly committed to it. What had started as a local initiative to support a handful of families had grown into something much larger than I'd ever imagined. And yet I knew there was more to be done. More lives to touch, more families to help, more love to share in Grace's name. The next morning, I dove into the work with a renewed sense of purpose. My first step was to assemble a team, a group of people as passionate about the Foundation's mission as I was. Clara, my friend from the art event, became my first recruit. Her creative vision and personal experience with loss made her an invaluable addition. Together, we reached out to others in the community, building a network of dedicated volunteers, healthcare professionals, and advocates who shared our dream of expanding the Foundation's reach. With the team in place, I turned my attention to securing the funding we would need to grow. I drafted grant proposals, scheduled meetings with potential donors, and hosted fundraising events that combine creativity with purpose. One event, a gallery showcase featuring art and photography inspired by the stories of the families we'd helped, was a resounding success. People from all walks of life came to support the cause, their generosity and compassion, a testament to the power of community. As the donations poured in, I felt a sense of validation that went beyond the financial. This wasn't just about raising money. It was about raising awareness, about showing people the importance of the work we were doing. Each dollar meant another family could receive the support they needed. Another child could experience joy in the midst of hardship. Another piece of Grace's legacy could come to life. The turning point came when the foundation achieved a high-profile success story. A single mother named Erica, whose son Jonah was battling a rare form of cancer, had come to us in desperation. She had exhausted every resource, every ounce of strength, trying to give Jonah the care he needed. The foundation stepped in, providing financial assistance for his treatments and emotional support for Erica through our mentorship program. Months later, Jonah's treatment led to a miraculous recovery. His story was picked up by a local news station, and soon it spread like wildfire. Reporters called, asking about the foundation's role in Jonah's journey. Invitations to speak at events and conferences flooded my inbox. Overnight, the Grace Foundation became a symbol of hope and resilience, its name synonymous with the kind of love and compassion Grace had embodied. The recognition brought new opportunities. Corporations offered sponsorships, prominent figures reached out to collaborate, and organizations across the country expressed interest in partnering with us. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I saw the possibility of taking the foundation national, a dream I hadn't dared to articulate until now. As the foundation grew, so did my sense of fulfillment. The work was demanding, often exhausting, but it gave my life a purpose I hadn't felt since Grace was alive. Each family we helped, each life we touched, felt like another way to keep her memory alive. She wasn't just a part of my past, she was a part of everything we were building. One evening after a particularly long day, I sat in the office, reviewing a stack of thank you letters from families we had supported. Each letter told a story of gratitude and resilience, of lives changed by the foundation's work. As I read them, I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness but of profound joy. This was Grace's legacy. This was her light shining through the darkness. The national expansion of the foundation brought new challenges, but it also brought new rewards. We opened branches in cities across the country, each one staffed by passionate individuals who believed in our mission. We developed programs tailored to the unique needs of different communities, ensuring that no family would feel forgotten or unsupported. At one of our national conferences, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of supporters, sharing the story of how the foundation had come to be. As I spoke about Grace, her strength, her kindness, her unwavering spirit, I saw tears in the eyes of the audience. Her story had touched them just as it had touched me. And in that moment, I realized that Grace wasn't just my daughter. She was a symbol of hope for everyone in that room. In the quieter moments, I often found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The woman who had once felt broken and lost was now a leader, an advocate, a builder of something greater than herself. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, becoming a source of strength rather than sorrow. Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were chapters in my story, but they weren't the whole story. The pages I was writing now were filled with love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that even the darkest moments could lead to something beautiful. One sunny afternoon, I visited a new playground the foundation had funded in Grace's name. The laughter of children filled the air as they ran across the bright, colorful structures. A plaque near the entrance read, "In loving memory of Grace, a light that shines forever." I sat on a nearby bench watching the children play and felt a deep sense of peace. This was what Grace would have wanted. A world where joy and love outweighed the pain, where her light could guide others even in her absence. A little girl with curly hair and a wide smile ran up to me, holding out a flower she had picked from the grass. "This is for you," she said, her voice sweet and earnest. I took the flower, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," I said, smiling down at her. As she ran back to join her friends, I held the flower to my chest, feeling Grace's presence in the laughter and sunshine around me. She was with me in every step I took, In every life the foundation touched, in every moment of joy I allowed myself to feel. The story of my life had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted. It had been filled with heartbreak and loss, but also with love and resilience. And through it all, Grace had been my guiding star, her memory a constant reminder of the strength we carry within us. As I walked away from the playground that day, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known before. Grace's legacy wasn't just a foundation or a playground or a name on a plaque. It was a living, breathing force, a testament to the power of love to overcome even the deepest pain. This was my new beginning, my purpose, my joy. And it was all because of Grace.